Live from the recording studios in St. Paul, it's Museum Studies with college and university art museums. So you've been in this class for a couple of months, and we talked about hopefully you'll be able to get onto your college campus this fall or fall of 2021, and maybe you could work in an art museum or a museum on your college campus. So we're going to start with something near and dear to me, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the Sheldon Memorial Art Gallery, which was built in 1963. And it was designed by one of the most famous architects in all of American history, Philip Johnson. We're very proud of that in Nebraska. And inside you'll see sort of typical of Philip Johnson, a lot of glass, very balanced building. And then inside, one of my favorite paintings is Edward Hopper's room in New York, known for his paintings of couples who were not exactly connecting. It also a sort of a voyeuristic view into their apartment in New York City. And then this is another one of my favorites. This is a nighttime cityscape of New York by Georgia O'Keeffe. And very famously, her husband, who was a jerk, said that women couldn't paint the New York skyline. And Georgia O'Keeffe said, well, you're a sexist pig and I'm going to do it. And she did a number of different paintings of the New York skyline, including one that is at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And then also somebody who sadly just passed away last year, Barclay Hendricks, African-American painter, known for his really wonderful paintings from the 60s and 70s of Black Power and Black is Beautiful. So I thought I'd put a little bit more of a diversity that is definitely in the Sheldon's collection. I worked there for a little while, not too long, in their library doing a little bit of research. So I myself have worked in a college art museum. Okay, now we're looking at, of course, the Wiseman Art Museum, and it was designed by the most famous architect today in the world, Frank Gehry. And it's wonderful that this is the first example of his very sculptural, kind of crazy, only could be done on the computer design with titanium on the outside. Now, of course, the most famous of his buildings is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, which is very similar in its outer shell. But we can take great pride in the fact that the first one was the Wiseman. Added on to a couple of years ago, the front is much different than it was when I first moved to the Twin Cities. And inside is a traditional Korean furniture gallery. I believe it was a professor at the University of Minnesota who had collected the furniture. And interestingly enough, it's at the Wiseman. And then the most famous painting, which is not actually owned by the Wiseman, it went away for a little while, for about 5-6 years, came back just recently. Douglas Argues Untitled, and it is a huge painting of a chicken farm with chickens very disturbingly in cages. All right, so Wiseman Art Museum, let's measure it up against others. Got a great collection of American early modernism of the early 20th century. I think, I don't know if it necessarily ranks among other art museums on college campuses so much, but it's a decent collection. Nothing to necessarily write home to mom about, but certainly not to be negative about either. Now we're going to go to the Tweed Museum of Art, which is at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. And they also have a very unusual little collection. It's a collection of images of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which excuse me, was part of calendars and promotional materials. Hold on a minute, guys. All right. Sorry about that cough. We're back to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And in advertisements across Canada, and I don't know why it ended up at the Tweed. I mean, we, of course, border Canada, but anyways, I love this kind of stuff where it's this really unusual, sometimes very kitschy, and you don't know why it's at a museum, and I love it. I bought a few postcards and cards of it, so enjoy. They've also really done a nice job with contemporary Native American art. This is Arnold Freiberg's. Oh no, sorry. This is Barbara LaSape's Powerpuff Girl Buttercup. Well, last time I was at the Tweed, I saw this incredible Native American contemporary show with lots of video and works that showed the influence of common culture and interweaving that literally with various different Native American designs. So yeah, they are I wouldn't say they're a cutting edge museum necessarily, but they are doing a better job with diversity. And then now we're heading to University of Kansas to the Spencer Art Museum. This is one I've not been to, and this is a work by a African American artist. I'm not sure necessarily what the themes are. Maybe a little domesticity and African Americans in that career line. Well, obviously that's what's going on here. But somebody I would like to know a little bit more about for sure. And then they've done a couple of different shows with Roger Shimamura. He's one of my favorite contemporary artists. He's Japanese American, and he brings he's sort of a pop artist, I guess you would say, bringing in various different images from, from 19th century Japanese woodblock prints, but also bringing in a discussion of Asian culture in America. Really great artist that I just love. Now we're headed to the Wexner Center for the Arts at the Ohio State University, and they and the Walker and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art always tend to have the same exhibitions that go through their galleries. Their catalogs, their exhibition catalogs are written by various different people in each of those institutions. And this is a work by Jason Moran, who's known more as a jazz pianist, but has also been dabbling in visual arts. And he had a show, lo and behold, at both the Walker recently and also the Wexner Center. I would say for the Midwest, the Wexner is one of the best contemporary art museums. Now we need to go to Columbia College, where some of you are going to be next year. This is one of only 4 museums totally dedicated just to photography. There's one in San Diego that I go to all the time. There's one in Arizona, and there was one in New York City. And this is a work by Cal Fay. People that just listened to my lecture on art of the aughts and 90s and 80s, or actually this was a part of for AP Art History. This was a part of the one of the EMACs. And she's a great artist. She's got a major show going on in Pittsburgh that will travel. Hopefully I'll be able to see it. One of her claims to fame is that she created an avatar in Second Life called China Tracy, and developed her art with inside the Second Life game, which is, I think, really kind of interesting. And then this is a work by an up-and-coming African-American contemporary photographer. It's called Moments of Sweet Reprieve by Anya Jackson. Now we're going to move to one of the most beloved and highly regarded art schools in the nation, Rhode Island School of Design. And believe it or not, they have a great collection of American colonial furniture. I guess it makes sense. It's Providence, Rhode Island, which was the center of furniture making. And this is one of the famous Townsend's family's works. It's a desk and bookcase. And then this is a work from the Italian Renaissance, a fairly obscure Italian Renaissance portrait painter. It's Portrait of a Gentleman. So what I'm trying to kind of show you is some of these really, been around for a very long time, 100 maybe so years, art schools. They're not just showing you, something that was made last year. They're also going to have what some of them would call a study collection, where you go in and you study the history of art inside the museum. And that's definitely the case with RISD. And then this is Helen Frankenthaler's Holocaust. We were just discussing in AP Art History. Helen Frankenthaler was an abstract expressionist of the 1950s and 60s. And one of my favorite artists. One of the ways you can tell it's hers, although you're not seeing that so much in this one, is a little bit of a deep saturation of color into the canvas. And she's definitely somebody that you should be familiar with. Okay, the Williams College is one of the premier colleges on the East Coast with regards to people majoring in art history. A lot of, for a while there was a lot of leaders of art museums in the United States who had gone to school at Williams College. And this is their work by Edmonia Lewis, who is one of the most intriguing artists that I've ever looked at. She was biracial. She was African American and Native American. And this is her bust of Hiawatha. She lived most of her life in Italy. She sculpted in white marble. And I think it's only a matter of time before somebody does a major documentary or a biopic on her. They also have more contemporary artists, African-American artists' work. This is, of course, Kehinde Wile's. He's more well known now because he did the official portrait of Barack Obama. And he is a leading figurative artist of his day. Right now, African-American figurative artists are sort of really dominating the conversation in art circles these days, and he's been very influential. He does the actual very photorealistic paintings of the African-American men that he asked to pose for him on the streets of different cities throughout the world, and then he goes to China and has a group of studio assistants do the incredible floral designs. And he does that because his first boyfriend was Chinese, and he established a studio over in China, and that's sort of kind of what he does. Now we're going to some of the very small colleges in Maine. This is Colby College Art Museum. This is a work by one of the most well-known Native American artists. This is Juan, it's pronounced Juan. Quick to See Smith's I See Red Flathead Vest, in which she's talking about various different ways that Native Americans are shown in common culture. And then this is work by Ana Mendata. She's a Latinx conceptual artist, I guess I would call her. And this is a series of photographs of her works outside. One of the more famous ones, she's covered in mud up against a tree, and one of my students actually recreated that work and it was cold. It was in the fall and it was very cold, and I thought, oh my gosh, I hope you don't die from it. Then we're going to go to the Bowdoin College, to their Assyrian relief. This goes back, guys, to the beginning of cities, the beginning of writing among humans. And what happened was, of course, that some of these East Coast colleges went over to the Middle East and excavated some of these palaces. And at the time, it was sort of like Indiana Jones. You could, basically steal this stuff and put it into the collections, and that's what's happened here. I mean, this goes back to 875, 860 BCE, before the Common Era. Um, Not a lot of art museums on campuses have ancient art. The reason being that now there's rules against uh, taking art out of countries. Especially, I would say, the East Coast, you're going to see it because they're older museums, but not really west of the Mississippi, I would say. This is a work by Mickalene Thomas. She's one of my favorite contemporary photographers and painters working today. Somewhere along the line, have we talked about her? Maybe not. Her mom was a fashion model early on. She did a lot of photographs and paintings of her mom, and now she's part of the LGBTQ community. A lot of her focus is on lesbian models and just a whole lot of texture. And this is a photograph, actually, obviously, texture and patterns in her work. All right, now let's go to the Ivy League. I've actually been to the Yale Art Gallery many, many years ago. This is a work by John Trumbull. It's the Declaration of Independence. And the Yale Art School is seen as one of the best in the country. Candy Wiley graduated from there. Chuck Close. So they have this rich tradition of graduating some incredibly successful artists. And they have some dead old white male art. And that's what you see with John Trumbull. He was in the inner circles of George Washington, and is famous for painting all those works in the rotunda of the national Capitol. And then we have something from Marisol, the most famous female pop artist of her day. She just recently passed away. Usually works in wooden sculptures with things taken from the common culture. The actual, so now we're going to look at the second museum on the campus, art museum on the campus of Yale, and that is the Yale Center for British Art. And it was designed by Louis Kahn, a very, very famous modernist architect. And inside, you'll see that it's kind of odd. So there's this sort of brutalism, actually not minimalism, but brutalism with concrete, and then you have all these paintings from largely the 18th century and the 17th century that were collected by a Yale alum. And let's look at them. So here you've got one of my favorites, Sir Joshua Reynolds' painting. I just love I love the dog, but I also love the composition where she's looking out from a English Rococo splat. That's what you call the back of a chair. It's just got a kind of an interesting composition. This is the time period of the paintings of the Grand Manner, in which all of these various different artists were painting the aristocrats of the day. And here you've got a painting of a horse, a very famous horse, apparently, of the early 1800s. Some of this stuff, I've been to the Yale Center for British Art. Some of it's quite boring and insipid, but it is what it is. Okay, now let's go to Harvard. It has 3 different museums. The first one is the Fog, and that's sort of the old masters, so to speak. This is a work by a very famous American late 19th century artist named John Singer Sargent. It's called The Breakfast Table. He's very much loved by Americans. And then this is a work by a German expressionist named Max Beckmann in the Busch Ringser Museum, which is basically modern art. So latter half of the 19th century, most of the 20th century. And then now controversially, the Arthur Sackler Museum, which is a museum for Asian art. And with the Sackler family being a major contributors to the opioid crisis and making billions of dollars off of it, people are asking for the Sackler Museum to have the name taken down from it. They've not been successful at Harvard, but they have been successful at the Smithsonian in DC. It's now called the National Museum of Asian Art, and the Sackler is in lower cases. So stay tuned. Maybe the Sackler will change its name. Now we're going to Dartmouth, which is another Ivy League school, and they have the Hood Museum of Art. And their claim to fame is they had one of the three huge stars of the Mexican muralist movement, Orozco, do a mural inside one of their buildings. And so you can travel out east and see a Mexican muralist at his best. Now we're moving to, hold on a second, I got my slide list going here. Oh boy, here we go, sorry, whoops. Okay, now we're gonna go to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, art school in the United States. And this is a work by a guy named Charles Willson Peale. He was a person that lived in the time of the Revolution and bringing together of the new government in 1789 under the Constitution. And this is a self-portrait of him. And there's an art historian who believes that the turkey was taxidermy to be bowing to Homo sapiens, and that on our right are the dinosaurs that ended up being extinct. And there's a mastodon skeleton that a woman is sort of, having a situation about, and then a man and a little boy in the background showing. He both had what we would see in a natural history museum, and also paintings of famous men of his day in his museum, which no longer exists. There's two main art schools that you want to go to if you want to paint in the Renaissance tradition, if you want to paint a commissioned portrait, and that would be the Lime Academy, and also the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And we've had a number of kids go to both and be very successful. But they also have some other stuff in their collection. They do a really nice job with their exhibitions. This is Romare Bearden's The Piano Lesson. Romare Bearden is a very well-known and talked about still today artist, more or less known for his art in the 60s and 70s, but he lived quite a long time. Now we're going to the Bard Graduate Center, and they have a lot going on at Bard College. They are known for their curatorial education, and are known for their exhibitions that have to do with media, and in this case, of course, graphic design. And so if you're interested in working in a museum, Bard College is one of the places you want to look up. Okay, now we're headed to the south, to Duke University. It's a fairly new museum, the Nasher. It hasn't been opened, in comparison to other museums. And they very much want to promote African-American art. This is a work by somebody that's been talked about a lot in the last couple of years, Henry Taylor. And it's actually a painting of a very famous conceptual art piece by David Hammonds of him selling snowballs on the streets of New York. And then here's a work by Amy Sherald in their collection. As we've talked about before, Amy Sherald did the commission portrait of Michelle Obama. Now we're going to go to the Ringling Museum of Art, and I've been there many, many years ago. It was on my birthday, actually, back in the earlier aughts. And Ringling, as the name would denote, is a campus of buildings produced by the guys that made their money off the Ringling Circus. And so you go into one building, and it's this huge miniature circus. It just is endless. And then they have a collection of all the posters from the Ringling circuses. And then, weirdly enough, they have one of the best collections of Baroque art. Baroque art is in the 1600s. And this is a work by Peter Paul Rubens, a Flemish artist, And these paintings are very large and they're very dramatic. And yes, you too can go see them down in Florida. We've had a couple people go to the Ringling School of Art, and so look it up. It's an interesting place. Now we're going clear across the United States to the Northwest, and we're going to the University of Washington's the Henry Art Gallery. And this is a work by a LGBTQ artist looking at various different transgender people through history. And so this person did this very interesting series about that. And they do some really sort of cutting edge stuff. I was there in Seattle 4 years ago, and a very interesting show there with Anne Hamilton. And then we head to more Northern California at the University of California, Berkeley. And unfortunately, what's up with the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive? They were closed on a Sunday when we were there about 5-6 years ago. They just reopened a new expansion. And this is they do lots of different things. They have a full film series all the time, and this is from Tibet. It's a film still from a film from Tibet. Then you go to Stanford. I've been there before. I did a workshop for a week at Stanford, and this is a work by Titus Kafar. I might be mispronouncing this. He is big these days in the world. He just got a MacArthur Genius Award. Look up his TED Talk. It's really interesting. And he's one of these figurative artists, African-American figurative artists of note. The Stanford Center for Arts has a large collection of sculptures by, I'll think of it in a minute, Rodin. And so I guess you could see that. I mean, I would not make a trip to Stanford to see their art museum, but I would totally make one to go see the art museum at Berkeley. Okay, we're heading down to the last. Now we're going to Southern California, to UCLA and to the Hammer Museum of Art. And interestingly enough, they have this old master collection from which you're seeing here this Rembrandt, but then they're now seen as probably the most forward-thinking and, where is art going type of museum in the United States. That's kind of a bold statement, but it's true. And here is a work from a nun who was a pop artist, believe it or not. Her name was Coretta Kent. I don't think she stayed her whole life a nun. I think when she became famous, she might have switched it up. But anyways, they had a show of her works. You know that I go to LA, try to go to LA during the holidays, and every other year I try to get to the Hammer. Very much worth your time. And then here's here's a photograph of her, the silk screening nun. Thank you, Sister Coretta Kent. Okay, under half an hour, we went through some of the most important art museums on college campuses. I hope you work in one and send me a postcard in the next couple of years.